Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit with The Nature of Things, where we are realigning God, government, and natural law so that we might restore our American Republic. Early in our history, as American justice was being developed, um, juries were empowered to both judge the facts of a particular case as well as judge the law. They could determine that the law was unjust and acquit a defendant based on being guilty of an unjust law. Justice was the actual intent of our judicial system. That intent has slowly lost its rightful place at the center of our court system. How did we get here? In the late 1800s, a group of people decided that our laws should evolve with society. Darwin's Origin of Species, having been recently published, was possibly what birthed that idea. But they determined that the revealed law of God was not able to keep up with the evolution of humanity. The then president of Harvard University, Charles Eliot, decided to use the idea of evolution to alter the bond between natural law and our nation's judicial system. He hired Christopher Langdell in 1870, who introduced the idea of case law. Case law being the writings of judges would take the place of Blackstone's commentaries as the principles of our legal system. So now, instead of a jury knowing right and wrong because they know the Bible and natural law, they have to be coached on what the law says, regardless of whether it violates the nature of things. The idea of what is just is now in the hands of partisans. Your politics decides good and evil instead of immutable principles of justice. So here's a quote from an Alabama Supreme Court judge, Tom Parker. It was a really deliberate effort by the president of Harvard University to change things, to introduce evolution into the teachings of law. So he hired Christopher Langdell as dean of Harvard Law School, who changed from using Blackstone's commentaries that had these immutable principles to case law approach, studying the writings of judges. So the idea of justice has been severely altered over these last 100+ years, and now here we are, unable to agree as a society on what is good. We can't even agree on one of the most obvious truths in the known world, that you don't become a citizen of a different country simply by being born there. This morning we have with us Chris Gleason. He built the forensic tools that exposed ActBlue's billion-dollar money laundering operation, and his evidence triggered actions from the at that time Senator Rubio, Texas AG Ken Paxton, U.S. House, and a presidential memorandum. Welcome, Chris Gleason.
Chuck.
How you doing? And before we get too far, let's bring Mike into the scene here. Good morning, Mike Levine.
Good morning, gentlemen. So, we didn't really talk about this, but Chris also championed how to defeat the deep state through administrative rules. Isn't that true, Chris?
We've been working on it.
That's pretty awesome.
We've been working on it.
Anyway, we'll have to do another broadcast on that subject, because today, of course, we want to talk about your United States Senate race. Okay, Chuck?
There we go. There we go. So the first question that we have on the floor is, have you been blacklisted by the RPOF yet?
Well, I would say yes. I think a lot of us grassroots candidates who are disrupting the narrative and disrupting these races in our state, we are all being blacklisted. We're getting no time. We're getting no mention. The Republican Party of Florida is endorsing other candidates before the people have even gotten a chance to hear or see what we're about. And that's highly, highly, highly problematic.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Ashley Moody is that she was appointed to fulfill the vacancy of Marco Rubio. So she never really won that election. What do you think about Ashley Moody, and is she an acceptable candidate at all?
I would say no. Based on my work here in Florida, with election integrity. I was doing a lot of things nationwide for politics and data. And so I really wasn't, like a lot of Floridians, didn't really know too much about Ashley Moody. I heard that she was a Republican, but as we were bringing significant evidence of election crimes and maladministration of our elections by election administrators, and money laundering tied to the Act Blue stuff, I mean, it became pretty apparent that Ashley Moody wanted nothing to do with free, fair, and legally administered elections, and that she seemed to be more concerned with fortifying and securing the selections in Florida, not our elections.
Yeah, speaking of selections, she was also appointed to her AG position by Ron DeSantis. Is that not true?
I think that she did at some point have an election.
Okay.
I know that the person that she ran against did a pretty good job of trying to expose that she was not actually a conservative Republican. And I believe that she barely squeaked out a win in that race. And then she had another race where we know that there was significant fraud in that election. And as a matter of fact, the significant fraud in that election, she was so desperate and so determined to conceal. She used illegal undue influence against a congressional candidate in your neck of the woods, in the Villages, candidate by the name of Laura Loomer. And Ashley Moody and her co-conspirators, they used illegal undue influence to try to shut up Laura and get her campaign manager and her campaign manager's business partner under control to not expose what was going on in our elections here.
Mike?
Very interesting. Chris, I just want you to know that I've been told to my face on multiple occasions from various different stakeholders, is what I like to refer to them as here in Lake County, that there's only certain people really who should even be considered to run for office. And they give me, certain guardrails that people have to come within before we should allow someone who has not have a history of governing to be considered for elected office. Okay, now and I know that's true because I've had it explained to me on several different occasions. Point number one, right? So then you bring into the whole, so for example, and I'm just saying, I do understand that James Utmeyer is actually a DeSantis appointee. But if you were to just juxtapose what Utmeyer's done with the AG slot compared to what Ashley Moody has done with the AG slot, I would venture to say that Utmeyer is much more proactive in defending Floridians than Ashley Moody was in her tenure as an AG. Can you agree with that?
I will have to say, as much as I don't like DeSantis appointees, Attorney General Utmeyer has done some great stuff, in particular with regards to human trafficking, child sex trafficking, the abuse of children. I have to give him
equity, and inclusion, right? DEI. Yeah. He's taking a strong stand on DEI. He's actually taken, of course, DeSantis. That's a whole nother. We don't really need to go down to that rabbit hole. We just don't have time to evaluate why Governor Ron DeSantis does what he does. But even on immigration, the DeSantis administration through Utmeyer is, I would suggest, doing a pretty good job in their attempt to support the president's immigration policy. Can you agree?
I would agree with that. So.
But where's Ashley Moody and all that?
Where is Ashley Moody? Well, Ashley Moody, I believe she had, I think, somewhere around 18 incidents where, they tried to close down maybe some massage parlors throughout Florida, very limited stuff with regards to human trafficking and child sex trafficking here in Florida, which is really terrible, right? Because Florida has long been listed as one of the top states for human trafficking, child sex trafficking, and all of that. And so I have to ask, what was Ashley Moody during all of? Where was she? What was she
Okay,
doing?
so let's do this, Chris. Let's make sure we do this, right? Because we really need to stick the landing on the question, is Ashley Moody an acceptable representative of the people from Florida to the United States Senate? And we're talking about it, but we really need to pin it down. I'm going to just toss in my 2 cents worth. And I would suggest that every single elected official, whether they're elected to the Florida legislature, the executive branch in Florida, Congress, the United States Congress, the United States Senate, we need fighters who are willing to protect, do the job of government. The role of government is to protect the rights of the citizens of the United States of America. So just help me understand whether, and of course it's a softball question for you because you're just going to agree with me. You're opposing her for United States Senate seat. But why don't you take that opportunity to run with that a little bit?
Sure. So we have some serious issues here. Some serious issues. So Ashley Moody, she was the AG. Apparently, if you pay her enough money, she'll look the other way for things. I don't know. I'm giving James Uthmeyer some latitude at the moment for what we've been bringing forth to the state of Florida. I have a meeting with FDLE tomorrow to discuss some money laundering that we have discovered into Florida political campaigns. And there's a lot of election fraud that we had been bringing forth. So I do know that we have a meeting tomorrow with some members of FDLE. I've got some folks that are coming with me to discuss this. And, ultimately that's going to be up to, James Uthmeyer, whether or not he's going to honor his oath, unlike Ashley Moody, and actually do something. Because at the end of the day, right, we all take an oath when we go to serve. You serve in the military, you take an oath. You hold office, you take an oath. And really what we have today is an epidemic of selected officials not upholding their oaths. And it seems to me that they're more beholden to the people who have selected them, not elected them. And moreover, the people who have, in some cases, like in Ashley Moody's, criminally laundered money into their political campaigns.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And let me just say at this moment, if you don't mind, Chuck, I just want to just comment right now that this is really, I don't know Chris very well. We've met a time or two around the state at various different events and haven't really spent a lot of time together. But I do know of him, and I know. But the thing I like about Chris is that Chris actually has the technical background to sort through the data in order to flesh out wrongdoing on a myriad of different fields. And we've already talked about election integrity today. Now we're talking about money laundering, which is all, electronically traceable through various different programs. And of course, the more we get into AI and stuff like that, the easier it becomes to discover these things. So I would suggest that when you bring that kind of technical expertise to the United States Senate, that's a good thing. Let's turn this over to Chuck for a minute and let Chuck make sure that we're on the right track here.
Yeah, well, we talked about money laundering and other things. One of the issues that Chris, you brought up is regard to CCP money, and what's going on with that and Senator Moody?
Sure. So I'm pretty well known nationwide as the guy who caught Act Blue and we have been using technology and AI to track and map the flow of all of this illicit money that has subverted our constitutional republic and our elections. And so we've been tracking all of this stuff. And so I knew because I keep an eye on certain races, certain things, that Ashley Moody had some ties to the smurfing operation. So you have two major smurfing operations, straw donor operations, money laundering that goes through Act Blue. And then, the Republicans, they tend to be a little late on the technology. They fired up WinRed a few years ago, and now they're trying to catch up to Act Blue. And so as I was preparing to do my due diligence on Ashley Moody's campaign, I discovered that there was some ties to a Chinese communist controlled and owned company, or series of companies, and they were criminally laundering money into Ashley Moody's campaign. They started as when they started with her Friends of Ashley Moody committee, PAC. They then had straw donors, several executives within the company donating on exactly the same day, same dollar amounts. They were changing employer names for these executives. It was, essentially all of the things that we have been using to track and map straw donors and illicit money into campaigns. Here we have, the former Attorney General of Florida hearing about this and knowing about this, but she doesn't do anything about it. Rather, she takes the money and she does nothing about it. And so then when she's selected, not elected, to the United States Senate, then the same Chinese de facto controlled company and its shell corporations, again, criminally launder money, not only into her federal PACs, but into her actual candidate committee. And, this is not what we want. I do a lot of polling. I learned a lot getting involved in politics about polling, and the data really does matter. And so in my discussions with Floridians and Americans all across the country, I always ask a couple of questions. And the newest question that I began to ask is, how do you feel about finding out that the Chinese communists are criminally laundering money into American political campaigns? Do you think that that's okay? And invariably, I think we're at about 99% right now for people saying no. Isn't that a felony? That's treasonous. And that's the general consensus. The 1%, however, the 1%, I think that person was very cynical, because they just said, well, aren't they all doing that anyways? But they shouldn't be doing it.
It's just crazy because foreign influence in our elections has become the norm, Chris. It's become the norm. But let me just follow up on something you said. So, it's very easy, confirm for me that I'm correct, that it's really easy to take the name of that corporation who's owned by the Chinese Communist Party, whose officers have, suspiciously donated into Ashley Moody's campaign, according to you. And we can just follow and see very quickly and easily what other campaigns they've donated to. Isn't that right, Chris?
It sure is.
So there must be others, right? She's not the only one, right?
Oh, she is not the only one, not by a long shot. So Governor Ron DeSantis was a very large recipient of this CCP money. It was brought to their attention. People tried to dispel that there was anything wrong with that. The RPOF, that very same organization that's freezing America First candidates, out of the political process and the leadership across the state, they also took CCP money. So as Laurel Lee, who was the former Secretary of State under Ron DeSantis, who also concealed a great deal of election fraud in the 2020 election across Florida. She took the Zuckerbucks, and now Laurel Lee is, she's a congresswoman who blocked, by the way, was blocking Rocky for Congress, Robert Rockford's campaign from being able to challenge the election in which we discovered all of these illegally requested vote by mail ballots that had been cast with no voter identification on them. And so Laurel Lee, she was blocking that from the House. So what's going on? What did the Chinese communists? What did the government? What did these companies get in return for Ashley Moody looking the other way? What did they get in return from these candidates? Because in politics today, they're not just giving you money because they like you and they think you're a swell guy, right? Especially the Chinese Communist government. Why? Or a Chinese Communist government controlled company. Now, one thing I really want to make crystal clear for all of your listeners: this is not my data. Okay, this is the government's own data, and my bringing forth the attention to the fact that this is a de facto controlled company by the CCP. I mean, so you have the CCP. They have a provincial government. Okay, the provincial government owns 100% another corporation that's traded on the stock exchange. That corporation then owns part of the company here in Florida that was quote unquote established as a Florida company. So they're going to try to say, oh, well, it's a Florida-based company. Well, here's the problem with that, right? The United States Commerce Department, under 4 different administrations, all ruled that because of the nature of the charters of these companies and the overt control that the CCP has on the board, on the money, on all of this, okay, that the companies are de facto under control of the Chinese Communist government, okay? And unless the company can prove otherwise, which they have not been able to do over many years of highly contested litigation, the CCP is in control. And so now these CCP companies have hired lobbyist firms. And within the lobbyist firms' own disclosures, they say, yeah, this is Chinese, these are Chinese controlled and owned companies. The court filings throughout all of the litigation all agree. So if the United States government's Commerce Department agrees, if the courts agree, if the lobbyist disclosures agree, and the own filings and pleadings by this Chinese communist controlled company all are in agreement, well, I guess it's kind of irrefutable that these companies are de facto controlled by the Chinese government. And why is this money buying our elections in America?
Yeah, another issue that we have here, we've talked a good bit about in our community, is these PACs and the idea that PACs are giving money to PACs and you have absolutely no idea where this money's coming from. Do you have any issues on that or comments on that?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot. So one of the big things that we caught Ashley Moody and her campaign consultants and PAC treasurers is a thing. It's called soft money. And so what they do is they take in all of this money from the state, from their state elections, both into their candidate committee and into the associated PACs that support the candidate. And then what they will do is they launder it through a series of other PAC transfers. And it's a circular transfer, and then it ends up back into the candidate's account. A similar thing occurred with Ashley Moody, as did Ron DeSantis. And so Ron DeSantis used this same scheme. Now, part of the problem with all of this, right, is you have large amounts of corporate PAC money that get filtered through, and these corporations are not supposed to be donating into federal campaigns, let alone, the Chinese communist money. And so once this dirty money, this Chinese communist money, gets commingled into legitimate funds, the whole batch becomes tainted. And so we really flush this out with the Act Blue stuff and the related Soros PACs and these all of these PACs and committees that took the money that was criminally laundered into those campaigns through the stolen identities of elderly voters all across America. And what we've seen, right, is that in a lot of these dark money PACs and issue PACs, like, say, Vote for Vets or Progressive Turnout Project or MoveOn.org or insert any other nefarious organization, we see extreme levels of contamination and taint. And so, ultimately you end up looking at like 90% of the money into these candidate campaigns are highly, highly, highly contaminated with illicit funds. And so, one of the things that we have been trying to do is put pressure on the U.S. Treasury Department to use executive orders specifically designed to stop foreign influence in elections to seize this money. Because a lot of the sophistication in the dollars behind the Act Blue, Win Red, and Democracy Engine funded campaigns, we have growing evidence that this is nationwide state actor activities, more than likely by the Chinese Communist Party.
So we have a viewer wanting to know if you have any comments on the Matt the Welder issue and what the RPOF is doing with him. But just a quick comment.
Quickly.
We're going to have to shut things down here in a couple of minutes.
We're not going to spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
So the RPOF and the legislature, whenever they're threatened, right? Whenever the machine's threatened, they create new laws. They did it in 2023 after we caught them doing all kinds of nefarious things in 2022. And so they tried to hide the data. They exempted data that I used to catch the fraud in 2022 for public records requests. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Well, it's interesting to me. The thing that really sticks in my craw is when DeSantis convinced Paul Renner and Kathleen Passidomo to rewrite the election law so that DeSantis didn't have to resign from his governor job to run for president against President Trump, right? I mean, that really was, that's just glaring in the headlights, right? That, when you change the laws for I'm guessing 24 million people, so one guy can run for president and keep his job, that to me stinks to high heaven. That just shows what they're willing to do. And believe me, the parties were compensated for their willingness to cooperate with the governor. And I'm talking about Paul Renner and Kathleen Passidomo right now.
Yeah, so we are, I'm sorry, we're very fast running out of time. And so we need to kind of decide how we're going to close this up. I know you are an election integrity expert. Is that the primary thing you want to run on, or is there anything else you want to highlight as to, where you're coming from? Should you be
What will
elected?
you do when you go to the United States Senate, Chris? I think that's the big close, probably. What are
So
your top 2 or 3 priorities?
election integrity is number one. We have a draft of what's called the Smurf Act, and it's essentially designed to stop the illegal money flowing into political campaigns. Our every issue, right? Every issue that any voter has, I don't care what it is, it really does go back to election integrity. Because if you don't have legally administered and legally certified elections on machines that aren't connected to the internet using Chinese communist chipsets, if you don't have real elections, then you have nothing. And at the end of the day, this is all make believe, KFAB, World Wrestling Federation political theater, and we can't have that. We have too much at stake at this point.
So, well, thank you, Chris, for being our guest. Mike, would you like to close us out with some final comments?
I've been watching Chris's campaign for a month or 2, and I've really kind of been on the fence, about whether I want to get involved in it or not. And to be honest with you, as a patriot, and I use the word, I know that, that's the word patriots, thrown around pretty loosely, but as an American who wants to protect our rights under the Constitution, and when we see all that's going on, and of course, I've been pretty involved in this stuff for the last, my entire career since I was, long story short. And of course, I've run for office a time or two myself. And I believe that a lot of the things that Chris is concerned about were leveraged against me, and I know that's true. So it's hard to, as I'm sitting here and, we're interviewing Chris today, Chuck, I find it really difficult to find a reason that would excuse me from getting involved, if that makes sense to you. I mean, if you're going to protect the country, right, Chris?
That's it.
Well, thank you,
Chuck,
Mike. Thank
you?
you, Chris. Really very much appreciate all of your comments this morning. And thank you all for tuning into our twice weekly live stream. Please follow us on Restoring Our American Republic and Facebook at Restore Our American Republic -ROAR. Please like and share our program. And remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. Until next time, God bless you. God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.